No, go ahead.
Jared Music, I'm from Parker. I just have a question about where do you see higher ed funding going for next year? The latest budget projections are out, and it's not looking good, so
Right.
just want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, our budget is off about $1 billion plus, and it gets worse. I mean, in this economy, income tax is an important revenue stream for our state government. Unemployment is reaching recent record highs. Sales tax is off. Capital gains is like, what's a capital gain? Nobody's making any money in the stock market. So the budget is a wreck. And the way our budget works is there's so much mandatory spending. You got to spend money on K through 12, and you got to increase it every year, no matter what. Medicaid, prisons. That higher education sort of is the what's left, and they usually bear the brunt of the cuts. And so the reality is they're going to get cut. But when you hear all the stories and the whining and the complaining from down the street about all the cuts they're going to have to make, and by the way, I often say watching Democrats cut a budget is like watching Brett Favre retire. It's crying or changing their mind. Sorry for football. A lot of football analogies. But over the last 2 years, when the economy was ripping and we had huge surpluses, we spent it all. We spent every dollar. When I say by we, I mean they. They had control of the reins. They hired 2,500 new state employees. They created program after program after program. They expanded new programs, not recognizing what anybody in the private sector recognizes, and that is the economy does this. So maybe we ought to set some money aside so that when the economy does this, we have a rainy day fund. And so the reality is, because we didn't have the discipline to save money in good times, we're going to have to cut programs when times are tough, and higher education is going to bear the brunt. But remember this, and if you get bored or you want inspired to get engaged, write a letter to the editor, because they're going to blame Tabor, they're going to blame tax policy, they're going to blame Republicans, they're going to blame Bill Ritter or Bill Owens and George Bush and all of us. But the reality is, had they saved any money, had they not hired 2,500 new employees, had they not done all those things, we wouldn't have to cut higher education as much as we're going to have to this year. But the chickens have come home to roost. And it's going to be a tough set of a few days ahead. We start this week cutting those budgets. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the stimulus package.
Yes.
Every time you hear about it in the news, you hear about construction, road work, all this stuff. And I think the last estimate I heard was 40,000 jobs are going to be created.
Right.
If there's somebody in construction here, I apologize, but most of the people that I know who have lost their jobs have never, ever dug a ditch or done anything of that nature. And I know a lot of white-collar people who have lost their jobs. So what else is being done? I mean, what else can be done? And is there any additional money that's going to be part of the package that could stimulate other jobs?
Right. It's a good question, and one that anybody who thinks they know the answer doesn't know. But let's go back to the stimulus package. Originally, it was about jobs. It was about roads and bridges and tunnels. And there's actually a lot of that work needs to be done. That would be a good thing to spend money on. That's 5% of about $1 trillion. So that's like a drop compared to the other types of money. One of the other things that's in that stimulus bill, by the way, is an operating budget, a bailout for the state of Colorado. We didn't save money, so the feds, courtesy of the government credit card, is going to send some money to us to plug the budget. But I think when you look at the net effect of it, I mean, even liberal economists are of the mind that this isn't going to help a whole lot. And if you look at what's happened in whatever the 4 or 5 weeks since this thing was signed into law, it hasn't helped that much. My view of it is this: certainly government needs to be proactive where it can, in an intelligent way, consistent with some limitations. But we also need to recognize that we can only do so much. I mean, government can't by itself just spend our way or tax our way out of this problem. Frankly, with George Bush and the Republicans in Congress, we spent a lot. If spending was what saved you from recessions, we would have never been in a recession in the first place, in my opinion. So we have to be sort of circumspect about how much we can do. What we can do, though, is not make things worse. And excessive spending, excessive taxes, raising car taxes, clamping down on the oil and gas industry, passing laws that empower unions in the workplace and in government, all the things that's happening in state capital, that will make it worse. And so that's what a lot of us have been saying. Look, we may not agree on what the fix is, but let's at least not make it worse. And I think there are a lot of things that are happening in Colorado and in Washington that are making it worse. We're just going to have to hunker down. I mean, we need to do what we can, but ultimately this is going to take a while for us to work through, and it's going to be difficult, and the choices for a lot of people are going to be tough, but we're just going to have to work through it and not expect that Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid are going to have some silver bullet solution, because they're just not. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jeff Sacco, and I just have some education questions.
Okay.
One is, how can we expect education reform when the Board of Education that oversees maybe a $655 million budget, those people are all volunteers?
Yeah.
You know, is it possible that we could pay people so we could have people that actually might inspire and produce? And the other question I have is, Senate Bill 57 went down, Transparency for Education, and I'm wondering how we can educate people that the lobbyists and the party line, Democrats voted against it, how we can educate people about that.
Yeah. You hear a lot about transparency in government, and people always support transparency as long as it's not applied to the programs and the bureaucracies that they like. And that's what we've seen in this legislative session, because it gets close to home, right? I mean, if you're in government and you're going to open the window to what you do to the world, there's going to be some pushback, and we've seen that this year, and the unions in particular are big opponents of that. In terms of, the education reform, we just got to stay at it. And I don't want to be all negative towards Democrats, because I do, on the education issue, there's a guy named Peter Groff, President of the Senate, who gets it. He represents districts and families, moms and dads, who are sick of seeing their kids go to bad schools. And he's a liberal Democrat, but he's a good guy, and he wants to work. He is with us on education reform. Frankly, President Obama, a lot of the things I just talked about, he talked about in his education reform. I just think that it's inevitable. There are some issues where you're either on the right side of history or you're not. It's inevitable at some point, if we're going to continue to maintain our greatness as a country, we're going to have to fix our education system. The public gets it, and as the public gets it, ultimately the politicians will as well. So we've got to stay at it.
How come we don't pay the board?
Well, this is like the question about the judicial vacancies. We have this group that nobody really knows that has a lot of power over education in the state of Colorado, and it's one of those things where you need a governor or a mayor or somebody with a bully pulpit to ride herd and stay on them and make sure they're doing their job. Ultimately, the legislature still has a lot of power. We can, through laws, tell them what to do. It just makes it more difficult because you kind of have one more layer that you have to work through. Any other questions? Well, it was a pleasure to be with you tonight. I've got a Facebook page, if you want to. It's so funny. Everybody's got a Facebook page. It's kind of become passé, so I'm embarrassed to even say. No, I have a Facebook page. Log on, link up with me. It'd be a pleasure to continue a dialogue with you. And just more than anything, I want to encourage you to stay at it. It's easy to get frustrated with what's happening in the world, especially if you're a free market libertarian who believes in old-fashioned values of hard work and personal responsibility in the American dream. But stay at it. The pendulum will swing back, and we too will have our day very soon. So thank you very much for the opportunity.